Hi, this afternoon. I have the pleasure of spending some time with Noor Syed. She's a technology strategist slash CTO in Microsoft Health sector. She is originally from Pakistan, but born in Dubai. And here she's been in New Zealand for the last 10 years. And here we have a brilliant opportunity to talk to her and hear her stories and experiences of her experiences in technology sector. Noor, can you talk to us about your journey in technology sector? And thanks for joining us.
Oh, no, thanks, Mina. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for this podcast. But yeah, so my journey as actually in the tech sector was a complete fluke. I think it was quite interesting because I actually, my sort of qualification, undergraduate and a master's degree in HR and finance. So I had nothing to do with tech before I actually came to New Zealand. So the only association I had with tech was actually just fixing friends' PCs, and I was always a gamer. So that was basically my association to tech, but never formally studied it. Um, so when I came to New Zealand, a lovely gentleman gave me this advice because I came as a migrant, as a student, pretty much with nothing at the time, was still struggling to meet ends, still, the typical student life in New Zealand as an international student. And there was a lovely gentleman that gave me some really good advice because I was very confused. I'm like, I don't know what to do with my career. No one's going to hire me in HR and finance. Like, what do I do? And he mentioned, he's like, look into tech. That's the emerging industry, and if you have the knack, why don't you? And I was like, the only knack I have is playing games in tech. So he's like, oh, just don't underestimate yourself. Just try it. And so I got into I started studying network engineering actually, because at the time it was either you get into network engineering or you get into software development. And when I looked into software development, I was like, I can't do code. I am going to just stick to engineering. So, and I did network engineering. I did a bunch of Cisco certifications, only to find out that they were pretty irrelevant in the market. It was mostly AWS and Microsoft. And so I'm like, okay, I'll do Microsoft certifications and AWS ones. And still, it was a struggle to find a role. But soon after, my partner and I, who's my wife now, we moved to Hamilton. And over there, I actually got the opportunity to working with a dermatologist who had an amazing global website of about an image database of about 25, 30,000 skin diseases and conditions and pages on that. So it's a global website. And she was transitioning into a different platform. So I started off as an assistant almost for her website, moved on into becoming a business analyst, a technical business analyst, and then worked with a software dev company that was actually managing their platform. So I got exposure that way. I did not apply my engineering skills at all, but that was it. And then it was time to actually start looking for other jobs. I hadn't planned it, and I'm like, all right, I look at LinkedIn, I look at, Seek, and I'm like, okay, what can I actually apply for? And there was a job that came up in one of the hospitals at Waikato for a business analyst. And I'm like, oh, cool. Let me apply. And I applied, and it turned out to be great. And so it was very instinct based. I really went with the flow. And I was so not qualified. I did not come from a tech background, but I landed this role. And grew into the role in the health sector. So from a business analyst, I went into solutions architecture, then went into enterprise architecture, and just continued on. So I guess the message here is that you don't have to come from a tech background or be super techy to get into the tech industry. So that was my journey into tech.
Hey,
Yeah.
this is awesome. So this is so much in line with the research that we recently completed, right? We came to know that a lot of women, I think it was about 40% of women or so, transitioned into tech sector. And they do that even in their 30s. I think it's actually quite unique, right? How there are many women out there
Yeah.
who would want to do, and
Yeah.
there is hope for them, which is
Yeah.
great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, while you were transitioned and stuff, were there any challenges that you faced earlier on in your career, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so I think early on in my career, compared to today, I think one of my key challenges were, being a migrant in a new country as well, right? So
Mm,
I was trying really hard to fit into the Kiwi culture, which I love. I mean, I love the Kiwi culture, but because I was never part of that culture, um, it was a constant battle to actually try to fit in.
mm,
Um, I was lucky enough that I mostly encountered really polite, lovely people, but there was still no sense of belonging because they had their own groups, their own cliques. Not that they were trying to isolate me from that it was not deliberate at all. But you just, if you don't know each other, you come from different backgrounds. There's no natural integration, and so that was a struggle, quite a lot. And on top of that, I don't drink alcohol, and obviously the sort of the social aspects of Kiwi socialization is going to a bar, having a drink, and socializing over a glass of wine, which I couldn't do. And obviously the Kiwi slang references like "she be right" or things like that. I just didn't know. And so I'd find myself early in my career going out with a bunch of, people from work, lovely people, but just I couldn't understand. It would just be like, I'd just be quite blank in most of my conversations. So I just didn't, I couldn't fit in. I definitely had imposter syndrome. That's what a lot of women go through. That studies have shown that women go through a lot more imposter syndrome than men do typically. And I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I was too inexperienced. I didn't come from a tech background, and it was mentally very draining. On top of trying to culturally fit into a different country. How I did overcome it was I did think outside of the box. I'm like, okay, what can I actually do differently here? Um, and so what went a long way was actually finding cultural similarity. So I come from originally from Pakistan and I grew up in Dubai, but I went to an international school of 62 different countries. And whatever I learned from that, I try to apply in New Zealand, and I try to find commonality between the New Zealand culture, the Kiwi culture, and the people over here. And then once I clicked on something that we had in common, it just flowed. Um, and what I did was it helped me embrace the Kiwi culture, which I absolutely love. And it also helped them embrace me and my culture. And so it was a two-way fit because I found two or three things that were in common and we just bonded over that. So it can be very little things, but it goes a long way to actually spreading awareness and embracing each other's identities and cultures. So that was really good. Imposter syndrome, I think, is a journey. Combating that and actually overcoming that, one of the things that really helped was building a network of support, people who gave me genuine feedback, and who helped me identify what actually triggered the feelings of imposter syndrome. And so I kept a mental note of what things were actually triggering that, and also kept a mental note of the things I've done well. Reminding myself that I've actually done these things quite well. um, I did also then read an article on Harvard Business Review around imposter syndrome being the topic for every Women in Tech event or every Women in Tech initiative. And rather than actually focusing on how to deal with imposter syndrome while you're going through it, is actually understanding why it exists in the first place. So a lot of it can be organizational in a culture of in a corporate environment. That what are your D&I policies? What are we doing as corporate organizations or other organizations to foster a culture of sense of belonging, bringing your authentic self to work as well? And if that may be a problem, and that isn't a imposter syndrome. I think it's a cultural issue of the organization. So actually really identifying what is really imposter syndrome and what is actually an organizational cultural issue that's driving that kind of feelings and behavior. So an example of it would be, I think I was working in a particular organization not way time ago, not now. It was it was a great organization, but it was very development focused. It was homegrown solutions. It was a dev shop, and they were starting to begin to becoming an enterprise. And when you become an enterprise from a small startup, you are needing different skill sets in technology. It's not just about code. It's not just about deep technology infrastructure, etc. It's about program management, product management, relationship management, a lot of it that requires, and account management, a lot of it that requires you to have soft skills and leadership skills. And so when I saw those people coming into that organization with very relevant skills that you would need for to growing an enterprise, they started feeling like they weren't good enough because it was so dev focused. And they started having imposter syndrome. And it's not just women, it was men as well. They're like, oh my God, I don't understand code. What do I do? And this is like a program manager or a product owner saying that I'm not techie enough. It's like, why? What's wrong here? You know, and so I think that imposter syndrome isn't really imposter syndrome. It's the organizational culture that's driving that kind of behavior. And so I think it's really important to identify that. And that makes you feel good as well. It's like, okay, it's not imposter syndrome. This is something wrong with the organization that needs to be fixed. And a lot of it is often it's actually just very innocent. It's just the organization isn't aware. And no one goes out to isolating people or being exclusive. Everyone wants to try their best, but I think it's the awareness that's sometimes not there. So yeah.
I just loved this response, especially the two dimensions that you brought in. One was about how you personally identified um, and took actions to actually come out from your comfort zone to network and
Yeah.
socialize. And this is something that I go through as well. I don't drink alcohol. And so going to a pub is really not my cup of tea. And so, how do you network otherwise, right? So,
Yeah.
you've shared some really brilliant suggestions there. And in fact, I was quite happy when COVID hit. I was like, oh my God, I'm expecting to go out and socialize.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
could just completely relate to it. And I'm just definitely going to take your advice on board. And I also liked how you sort of isolated the organizational culture with the imposter syndrome as well, right? A lot of the times I feel like as a woman, I fail to recognize it.
Mm.
And at times we often internalize it so much that we come to quick conclusions that, oh my God, I'm probably not good enough to do this. I'm not the best fit,
Yeah.
right? But it's just about taking a step back and seeing, okay, what is actually happening here is the key. Really good insights, Noor. I really appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Could you share a pivotal moment in your career that significantly impacted your professional trajectory?
Um, I think that very genuinely, and I'm very humbled by this, is that it was really due to a particular person in my life, and it was an excellent manager that I had. It was just sheer luck to have her in my life at the right time. I think she really shaped me as an individual, fostered really good leadership skills. And she, above all, I think she embraced who I was fully and identified my strengths and capitalized on them. So, where as a manager and as a leader, you do have to balance weaknesses with strengths, with your staff, with your people. I think with her, she managed the weaknesses, but what she tried to do more, and it was not just with me, it was with most of her staff, was I want to zone in and zoom into your strengths, where your weaknesses then start becoming irrelevant, right? You
Mm.
can work on your weaknesses and you have to learn, it's continuous learning, and you have to have a growth mindset, but what are your strengths and how do you capitalize on them? So she and that what that led to was she didn't ever put me in a situation where I wasn't comfortable leading or where I wasn't comfortable doing my job. And she was very good at that. So um, and that coupled with constructive feedback, so every time she'd give me some constructive feedback, which was like, hey Noor, I've seen a few gaps here and there. um, this is a good way to actually manage those. And then also, these are some of your strengths. why don't you use more of this rather than this, you know? And I think a combination of that and also checking in on me, right? Checking in on everyone that, she was very intuitive as well, right? So not everyone is intuitive. She had the advantage of being quite intuitive in terms of, you're looking a bit off yesterday. I might be wrong. I'm just calling in, or sorry, messaging in just to check in on you. How are you doing? And that created a sense of belonging, right? And when that created a sense of belonging, what it then led to was feeling safe to fail. I think that's very, very important. We're humans. We will fail. There is no such thing as perfection in any industry, not just tech, right? Especially in an industry that's continuously evolving at such a rapid pace. There's bound to be some level of failure, right? And so the success side of it is that failing fast and failing safely, I think, is was very important to this manager of mine. Um, and so then, because a lot of I grew from I grew a lot. I was quite naive when I first joined that organization with my manager, and I was far from being perfect, right? But what it did was that time that I spent with her, it gave me the boost to realize actually and get out of my imposter syndrome, where actually I thought, you know what, I actually have the potential, and I can do this. And since that day, I really worked night and day, super hard in upskilling myself, and I never looked back since then. And I think that was the kind of boost I needed from that manager. So I think for most people, I think it's, if you could have a relationship with someone like that that's experienced, who really understands who you are as a person, embraces who you are as a person, and capitalizes on your strengths, I think you're in really good shape then, because then there's um, the world is your oyster once you understand your superpower. Yeah.
Awesome. So nice to hear that story. Now, as a leader in tech, what are some of the core values and principles that guide your management style?
Yeah. So I think this might be a little long, but I think I definitely don't. So as a core value, I don't really believe in management. I think if you are a good leader, your people and the people you work with are empowered, and thus you don't require that level of management, right? So if you have good leadership, you don't really require that level of management. And so the leadership style that I have is very much empowering others to get the best outcomes. And I read this amazing book that resonated with me, and also that's the kind of leadership style I've always aspired to. And there are a bunch of principles that the book talks about and that I apply in my daily life and try to do it. So number one is that the quality of a good leader is listening and insightfulness with wisdom, right? So there's a Latin word that they call sapiens, and that it means insightful and discerning. And what it means is listening and absorbing without the intention of changing anything. So there's a big difference between listening for the sake of listening, understanding, collecting the data in order to change something or influence something, versus I'm listening to learn more, absorbing things how they are, and I'm not necessarily here to change this. I want to understand more. It's very different. And so you're suddenly on the back foot, observing and understanding the person rather than trying to change and assume, which is a very difficult thing to do when you're in a leadership position trying to get certain outcomes, but it's so important. The second one is contentness. So being content with what you have. And I think one of the things is that if you're a senior exec, nothing against senior execs who love to travel in luxury, that's perfectly fine. I have nothing against that. But I think for me personally, um, traveling in luxury as a senior exec, staying at great places, and actually presenting yourself as someone different to your people can can be quite discouraging to some point, right? So you want your people to be able to relate to you and to see themselves in you. And so I think as soon as you go up the ladder almost, and as soon as you start becoming senior leadership or executive leadership, I think the more humble and content you become, the better it is, and the more accessible you are as a leader, the better it is. So for me, I think that's really important for your people to be able to feel like they can access you, and then in order for you to be accessed, you need to be able to be like them or feel like you're a part of them. So I think that's really important. I think the other one is the aura of calmness. It's very important to be calm as a leader. And I think people should your people should be coming to you for stability, for decisions, for clarity, and calm. And if you're feeling like if a person is feeling like a swamp of emotions around a leader, that would make things much less straightforward. And so the aura of calmness and being collected, and practicing that, and I know leaders are humans as well, that they can't be perfect all the time, but it is a great skill to have, to provide that for your team, stability for your team. The other part is decisiveness. I think we live in a world that there's a lot of ambiguity, especially in technology. It's a rapidly changing industry. You have to learn on the fly. And so you can't have all the answers all the time. So within that ambiguity and that chaos, leaders should be very decisive, so people don't go off on the just on like just everywhere, and they just don't know what to do. And so actually having some clear decisions and confidence in direction is really important. And sometimes it requires you to take risks because you're not absolutely sure about that decision, but you just have to make it. So it's taking on risk, and I think it's very important. And the last two is, I think one is encouraging creativity. And how you do that is, I think even if as a leader you have the answers, um, you shouldn't always be the one giving those answers. You should let your people give those answers. You should let your people lead. You should produce more leaders if you're a good leader, and you should let them feel valued. And that's where creativity comes, because if you're not letting that happen, you're inhibiting that. You're inhibiting any out of the box thinking as well. And it provides a safe space for people as well, when they can actually lead themselves. And so you become from a as a leader, you become a someone setting direction to someone who's now observing and listening, and it's selfless, right? And you're letting others lead. And the last one is respect and empathy. I think that goes without, it's not just lip service. So respect is so important, between your teams and with your customers and with everyone you work with, even someone at the front desk, right? So the absolute respect and empathy towards people is really important. And the willingness to understand, even things that are not significant to you, just at least have those sort of the willingness to understand. And that is also what promotes diversity and inclusion in the real way, and it becomes organic. So diversity and inclusion, as soon as you have respect and you're empowering people, diversity and inclusion is just organic. It just comes as part of the package. And so you don't have to deliberately have D&I priorities, because it's just happening organically. And so you're embracing um, everyone. You're not just accepting and tolerating, you're moving on to embracing them fully and celebrating them. And so those are, I think, some really key leadership skills, qualities that a good leader should have. Yeah.
You just described how it is to be a superhuman.
It's which is impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's really cool though. It's like, it just feels like you have really thought through it. It's just amazing, really.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the most significant changes you've seen in the tech industry since you started?
Um, I think it's no secret. Like AI has been obviously the largest disruptor after the introduction of internet and cloud.
Mm.
And I think, more than just the introduction of AI, I think it the democratization of AI is significant, right? Because now AI is not just limited to a subject matter expert working on it, right? Um, when at Microsoft, when we talk about, co-pilots, it's the reason why they're called co-pilots. It's because it is that technology being democratized, and how it's being democratized is that it's embedded into products that are already existing in people's environments. It's products that are already being touched by millions and millions of users across the world, right? And so it's at their fingertips, right? And so we've never had that before. We've never been able to have that before. I have come across people that have been in the hospitality industry that are building their own models right now, AI models. And it's just amazing. It's not just limited to subject matter experts. So I think there's a lot around the democratization, and what it's giving more birth to almost is, I think, lots around security, cybersecurity, responsible AI, and safety. Frameworks are changing, ways of working are changing, and I think that's just emerging and changing all the time. So now more than ever, security, responsible AI, change and adoption, frameworks, policy, and ways of working is just becoming more and more relevant in the tech industry, and that is only because of the democratization of AI. AI has been there since the 1960s, 50s. It's not a new thing, but it's the democratization of it. Yeah.
Awesome. So, in your opinion, what are the emerging trends in tech that we should be paying attention to? I guess you've sort of answered it already.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, I guess it's become, if we talk about AI, it's become more about people,
Mm.
and how we transform ways of working, which is an emerging trend. It's not transforming the way of how we run IT operations. It's more about people now and the end consumer. And so how AI is actually doing the heavy lifting of mundane tasks, boosting productivity, etc. And again, like I just mentioned earlier, responsible AI and policy is a great need and an emerging trend. The other is, I think, low code, no code, and infrastructure as a code is now becoming even more relevant. Those are some really key emerging trends, and I'm sure there'll be more that we'll start seeing next year, 2 years from now. Yeah.
Cool. Can you discuss some specific challenges women face in the tech industry and how you believe they can be addressed?
Um, I think one of the im- imposter syndrome is very common, right? So that there's no secret that there's definitely a lot of that today, with women in tech. There is still today, some level of discrimination in the tech industry where it's quite male dominated. But the good news is that I think we have some fantastic male allies as well. I think now more than ever, um, we have some really good male counterparts that are really driving the boat here for women in tech. I don't think we can actually, as women in tech, we can't do it without our male allies. And I mean, an example of it would be, I was there was once this time I was in a meeting, and there were a bunch of, I was the only female at the time, and clearly there were some responsibilities that were with me, not with my male colleague. And that person, that particular gentleman, and I think it was just completely subconscious, right? Like it was unconscious. But he kept talking to my male colleague and just wouldn't even look at me. And he'd just keep bringing it up to him. And so my male colleague kept redirecting it back to, but you need to talk to Noor about this, but actually this is with Noor. And eventually he did start talking to me. Um, I couldn't have done that without my male colleague, right?
Mm.
I couldn't, and so I think we have some really good male allyship,
Mm.
and I think I think that's come a long way. I'm really proud of that as well. And also now, I think the other good news is that there are a lot more women in tech, and that's been a revolution almost with more women in tech. But I think one of the key challenges are to some degree that they still, even though they're in tech, they don't still have a seat on the table, especially in leadership. So we need to have more representation with women in leadership positions as well. And even if they are in the tech industry, there needs to be equity as well.
Very well put, Noor. I think the more conversations we have, the more we create awareness about it, right? Like how you
Yeah,
mentioned, it's like no one plans to behave in a particular way, but I think it's just the socially ingrained stereotypes that make us behave in a specific way, and it's
yeah,
most often unconscious.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to young women aspiring to enter the tech industry?
Um, it is so that advice is also something I keep giving myself as well. I try to. So I think number one is believing in yourself. And I know that's very cliche, easy said, hard done. But I think what it means to believe in yourself doesn't mean that believe that you won't fail. It actually means that believe that you will fail, but you will learn from it and become successful, right?
Mm,
And so it is the best way to learn. Failing is the best way to learn. So the belief is that I'm not perfect, but I will learn. Once, if I make mistakes, I will learn from it, and I feel safe enough to do that. So I think that's one thing. Um, Keeping a mental note of what you have actually achieved, even if it's something small, but it is something you have achieved, right? And keep reminding yourself, that if you're feeling like you're not good enough, you're going through imposter syndrome, whatever, or feeling intimidated, keep a mental note of actually in the last few months I have achieved these things, or last few years, or whatever the timeline. And keep reminding yourself that you've done a lot, um, and and I think the art of letting go is my favorite. When I talk a lot about the art of letting go, probably I'm a broken record. They're like, here we go, and we're talking about the art of letting go again. But I think it's really important. That's something I learned, was there are things that you just can't control, and spending time and investing your mental health, your energy on things that you can't control, it's not worth it. It's not good for you. It affects your mental health, your self-esteem, your confidence, your relationship with other people. It's not it's counterproductive. It doesn't set you up for success. So just knowing when to let go, or actually not just knowing when to let go, but also identifying what not to take on,
mm.
right? So I think that is a really, really important skill to have. It's a really difficult skill, trust me. I'm still working on it, but it is so important. I think the art of letting go, and also reminding yourself that you can't please everyone. You just can't. It's impossible. And also keeping and remembering that, you know people don't, and this has been spoken about quite a lot by a lot of people, but people don't remember what you do. People remember how you made them feel. And
Mm.
so always keeping that front and center. Like if you have a relationship with someone or your customers or with your colleagues, always invest time in checking on them, trying to be helpful, trying to empathize, because that's what people remember, not so much your skills or what you do, um, and invest time in a mentor that is consistent and constant for the long term. And it's not just having a few coffees and talking about how to improve your LinkedIn profile. I think it's investing in someone that sees you grow over time and is invested in you, and your professional development and personal development. I think that's what I had with my manager. I've had that for the last 4 years with her, and that has come a very long way, right? So I think finding someone like that, investing your time in a mentor like that, yeah.
Awesome. So, how do you maintain a healthy work life balance, especially given the demanding nature of the tech industry?
Yeah, so my typical response, it will be a typical response, running and
Uh,
meditation. I do a lot of that, but and that's what a lot of people do as well. I'm aware of it. Um, we, I think the other thing I do now is for work-life balance, I do stock take. So every like just before Monday, on a Saturday, I do take some time with a cup of tea, looking at my calendar, and stock taking on these are some things I just can't control. These are some things I don't want to invest too much of my time in. And these are the things I want to focus my time on, just on a weekly basis, right?
mm,
And doing it with a cup of tea. It doesn't have to be something comprehensive, Um, I definitely do that now. It's become a bit of a habit. It's really helping. The other thing that I do encourage, I was never good at this. I'm starting to become better, is always talk to someone that you trust after a hard day of work. Don't internalize it. Talk to someone you trust if you've had a really hard day at work. And even if
mm,
it's something you think is not is stupid, you know, you there's nothing wrong in being vulnerable, right? You should show some level of vulnerability and always talk to someone that you trust. Yeah.
yeah, beautiful. Can you share a time when you had to make a tough decision and how did you handle it?
Um, yeah. So that I think um, during one of my previous roles, I had to have some tough conversations with a customer that had certain issues with a member in my team, and that particular customer wanted that member in my team to be off the project. Um, I felt responsible because I had to do right by both the customer and the person in my team. And I tried to mediate it, trying to understand, okay, where are the gaps? How can we work together? How can we improve? Because at the end of the day, we all had a common goal and a shared purpose. And, it just wasn't coming to that point. Even with the facts on the table, with mediation, with input, with insights, everything, it just wasn't coming to that point. And so I actually had to make a tough decision of not getting that colleague off the project because um, the principles that I was working off of was, you learn from mistakes, you get the feedback, you apologize, you give people the chance to work together again and again. More than anything, you learn from mistakes, and it's just those principles that I work off of, and that was just not acceptable to the customer, and so I just could not sacrifice my values. Um, and so I had to make a tough decision because obviously the customer was not very happy. But 2 years, sorry, I think about a year down the road, the same customer is like, I'm so glad you did that because you are a person of integrity, um, and so it was so hard at the time because I was like, oh my God, this customer is just gonna hate me for the rest of his life. But it was just the right thing to do. I couldn't sacrifice my values there. Yeah,
That's beautiful. What are
yeah.
your thoughts on the future of women in tech? Where do you see the industry heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
Um, I think the future of women in tech is extremely bright. I think there is increased representation. There are more and more women coming into leadership positions. They're much more supportive working environments. I think the hybrid work style has helped women with children in particular, and families. There's a lot of focus on gender equity and a lot of focus on STEM education for young girls. Um, I think one of the areas that I'm most excited about is tech solutions for women issues like safety tech, health tech, that is driven by women because they understand those problems. So I think that's very bright for women. In fact, I feel privileged to be a woman in the tech industry today. So yeah, I think it's absolutely bright and very positive. Yeah.
Great. What projects or initiatives are you currently excited about and why?
Um, so I'll be biased because I work in health, so I'm excited about health. Um, I think I'm really excited about seeing technology, particularly in data analytics and AI, in helping with health equity and disease elimination, right? So you can actually use a lot of that technology to potentially provide some level of disease elimination because you have better insights now. Um, and when you start moving towards that, there's still a very long way to go. I can't just say there's a piece of technology, it's removing disease today. I can't say that yet, but because there's the potential of that, I think its impact on society is massive,
Mhm.
not just tech and health, but also politically, and for long-term vision of economies, if you have disease prevention. So I think really excited to see how tech helps evolve the health industry. Yeah.
Mm. Awesome, Noor. I just loved talking to you this afternoon. The way you articulate things, the way you're just so positive about talking about some challenges as well. And you put everything in perspective. And I just love the optimism that you have about future for women in tech. And I do think that yes, we are making progress. There's still more work to be done, but we are heading in the positive direction with leaders like yourself on the table who are like really willing to help out other women. Thank you so much. Do you have any closing comments?
Oh no, thank you so much. I mean, I think you've been a fantastic host. I'm really grateful and privileged to be on your podcast because I think the topics that you have talked about are so incredibly important. And it's such a great starting point to start having some actions in place and a call to action as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Noor.
Thank you.